Dr. Joel Warsh, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me here.
It's great to sit down together.
Yeah, great to see you again.
Your book came out right around my book came out, and it was great reading it because I got to read some of the same information, and I love that instead of it coming from a lawyer, it comes from a pediatrician. You've been practicing for 10 years. You did your residency at the Children's Hospital in Los Angeles.
As Western as you can get.
Western as it can get. And you have an MD.
I do.
And you have just a pediatric practice. See babies onward, right?
Pretty normal, yeah. All the normal stuff.
Except that, if I understand, about 15%, 20%, I think you told me, of your patients just don't take any vaccines, and the rest of them take vaccines, but a little bit of a delayed schedule.
Yeah, I mean, I think what makes me unique is that I don't force anybody to do anything. I'm not against vaccines. We have all the vaccines in our office. I just believe in informed consent, and we don't force people to do things, and we have discussions, and we come up with whatever plan makes the most sense for them. Some people don't vaccinate. Some people do the full regular schedule. Most people do somewhere in the middle and do a slow schedule. I'm in California, so we have very, very, very strict rules for school. And so there are certainly a fair percentage in my practice that don't really want to vaccinate, but don't want to homeschool. So they just do a slow schedule. Maybe they start later, and then they get all their vaccines done one at a time. But at least they're unvaccinated for some amount of time, like the first couple of years.
And so the burning question that I think a lot of people have, especially from somebody who in your situation has spent 10 years seeing the health outcomes of children who've received vaccines, one or more, let's call it, versus kids who've gotten no vaccines. What does that differential look like to you? Are the unvaccinated kids all dead?
They're not all dead. We haven't lost any yet.
Okay.
So, I mean, from what I have seen, in my opinion, I feel like the kids that are unvaccinated seem to be more healthy, don't come in as much, don't have as many chronic conditions, have lower rates of basically everything. Now, I have to be reasonable that there certainly are the kids that are more naturally minded that don't necessarily want to come to the doctors. Maybe they don't come in as much, but I have to believe that those kids would come in when it's serious. So maybe there are some kids with a little cold or a little ear pain that don't come in, whereas the vaccinated kids are more willing to come in because they're just more interested in using the health system versus the more naturally minded patients that just don't come in for anything until it gets really severe. But certainly if it gets severe enough, they're going to come in. I don't even know that there is a difference in how much they come in, but I have to be reasonable there might be.
Yeah, well, I don't disagree with you that, I mean, maybe there's a difference in healthcare utilization between populations that don't vaccinate versus those that do. They're already not getting vaccines. Maybe they're less likely to go to doctor. But as I've seen in some of the retrospective epidemiological studies around this topic, comparing vaccinated and unvaccinated, the way that they control for that I've seen in those studies is they pick the type of harms that people would go to the doctor, as you just said, no matter what. I mean, if your kid can't breathe because they're having a severe case of asthma, they're not just sitting at home, while the kid can't breathe.
That's the issue I've had with so much of the research, where there's such an emphasis placed on the amount of visits that kids come in. And it's like, but a kid who has a severe issue is going to seek healthcare. Mm-hmm. They're still going to. I mean, you have to be reasonable. There could be a small difference, but realistically, if your kid's not breathing, they're coming in. If they have a severe urine infection, burning pain, they're coming in. They're going to still get antibiotics. They're still going to seek medical care in general. So to me, and also at least at my practice, there's no bias. They know I don't care if they're vaccinated or not, so there's no reason for them not to come in. I think some people might be scared to go to the hospital because they're worried about being judged, but they're not going to be judged at my practice, so there's no reason that they wouldn't come in if they had an issue, or at least call.
In fact, with that would create a bias with regards to those who are unvaccinated in favor of coming to you versus the hospital, because if you don't have any vaccines, the hospital is probably going to give you a hard time. They're more likely to come to you first for going to hospital, where the kid's vaccinated doesn't have that same concern about going to the hospital. So in fact, it might, if anything, on the severe conditions, it sounds like the bias could cut in that they're more likely to come to you over a hospital.
I think that makes sense because there's certainly a concern when families go to urgent care or the hospital, they're going to be judged if they're asked those questions.
My firm gets this all the time, where they show up, they're, the moment they said are they up to date? And the parent says anything other than up to date, it goes down, often to a bad place, especially if the child's been admitted. Because then it can really go to a bad place. Got parents who say, they're going to call CPS, or they have called CPS with regards to, wanting to give a child one or more vaccines in a context where I don't even see the reason for it. But anyway, putting that aside. let's put that aside. All right, so just focusing on the conditions where a parent is going to seek medical care, because it's not something where they would just be like, oh, it's just a little cold, I don't need to go to the doctor. What is the differential between the vaccinated and unvaccinated kids as you've seen over the last 10 years in your practice?
I think it's massive. I mean, I don't have a specific number, but I very rarely see the unvaccinated kids for anything other than checkups. And you hear all the time, you see the families that come for their checkup, and you talk to them and like, oh yeah, we've been healthy. We haven't even needed medication. It is pretty staggering. It's not nothing that I would have ever imagined during residency, during training, as an early doctor. It's so obvious when you see it that it makes me question so many things. And it's one of the reasons why I even started talking about vaccines in the first place, because you have these two very different stories. You have the medical story, which is vaccines are the best thing ever, and they save so many lives, and they're safe and effective. And then you actually see these things in practice. And then you talk to other doctors who don't see vaccinated kids, and you talk to families who have some kids that are vaccinated and some unvaccinated, and you hear the same thing over and over and over again, which is the unvaccinated kids are healthier. I had 2 kids with the vaccines, and they have all these issues, and then I had my 3rd kid, and I decided not to do it, and that kid never gets sick. Now, is that science? No, it's anecdotes, but it's still really important information. And I like to be scientific. I have a master's in epidemiology. I've done research before. This is the kind of research we could get. We could actually know if unvaccinated kids are healthier. We could know this fact, and we could figure that out. This is something we could do, right? I mean, we have some research. I know you're like, there's some studies out there, but I don't think we've ever done the definitive science that we need to do, or we could do, or certainly we don't have the best science that we could have on this topic, and we need it.
Yeah, well, it'll be tough to do those studies because even if you did the study and you did it right, whoever did it is going to have their career ended pretty quick, in my opinion. But let's just but stepping back from what you just said, because I think you're right. You want to make it as scientific as possible, to make it as objective as possible, right? And so the one family's experience is anecdotal, fair enough. Where then we have something a lot more, I would say, reliable than that one family's experience of their vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids. Though, I could say that well over a decade I've been doing this, I get the same story all the time. The vaccinated kids in this family have the health issues. The unvaccinated kids don't have health issues. Sounds like you're seeing the same thing in your practice, and you're seeing it over a 10-year period. And so every one of those, in some ways, it's not the same, but you can kind of think of it as a 10-year case series, family after family after family, sequentially over a 10-year period is what you're seeing it in your office. And for the unvaccinated kids, to the point you made earlier, I didn't even think about it when you said it earlier about, a bias, maybe they don't go to the doctor. You're seeing these unvaccinated kids for checkups, right?
Correct.
So if they had a health issue in the interim and went to the hospital or had some other,
I would have found out.
You would have found out.
Right. Or if they have, I don't know, autism, we would see it.
You would see it, right? So it's not escaping you, even if you're not the person they went to at that moment. So you're getting a pretty good view of it. All right, so that's your experience, and maybe somebody wants to call your pediatric 10-year experience somehow anecdotal, which I don't think it is. It's one, but okay. You're in LA, right?
Correct.
All right. How many other doctors would you say in the LA area also have more than an insignificant number of unvaccinated kids in their practice, if you know?
If I had to guess, I would say 10. I mean, it's hard to know for sure because you don't know every doctor, you don't know who's not speaking out. Some of them have a small practice and they just do their own thing.
But you know of around 10.
But I know around 10 because I know who goes where, who switches practice, who comes to us.
Okay.
Who moves around. So I think that's probably...
Do you know those other 10 pediatricians?
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
What have you ever spoken with them about their experience with regards to the kids that have no vaccines versus kids that are vaccinated and the health outcomes?
Yeah, some of them, and they all said the same thing.
Same thing you just said.
Everybody.
Which is
they feel like the unvaccinated kids are healthier. I have never spoken to anybody that takes care of both that doesn't think that. I mean, I've been to conferences and I spoke at the White House or the MAHA day in DC on vaccine injuries, and everybody has the same story. So I don't know of anyone that says the vaccinated kids are healthier. The vaccinated kids don't get as many vaccine preventable diseases. I think that's a reasonable thing to say. I think, there are more kids that are unvaccinated that get measles or whooping cough. I think we can reasonably say that. But for every other thing, it seems like the unvaccinated kids are healthier. That's what I've seen. That's what has led me to want to write the book. That's what led me to talk about this, because if that is true, we should know that fact. So that way we can have honest conversations about what the risks versus the benefits are for vaccines. And that doesn't mean that no vaccines have benefits. Doesn't mean that there can't be vaccines that people aren't going to take. There aren't situations where it's useful. For example, in hepatitis B at birth, if mom has hepatitis B, your baby should probably get a hepatitis B vaccine. Like, there's a really reasonable chance they're going to get it if you have a vaginal birth. But if you don't have hepatitis B, the risk is infinitely small. Those are two different things. That's supposed to be informed consent. You're supposed to be able to get that information and make a rational decision. But if we don't know what the risks are from vaccines, then how do we make that decision? People ask me all the time, like, do you see vaccine injuries? Well, what is a vaccine injury? Like, how do we define that? How do you know if a kid has symptoms 5 years later, if they have eczema, allergies, autoimmune conditions, if that's related to vaccines? Because if it is, then we see it all the time.
Well, I mean, based on the weight of the existing scientific evidence, from my perspective, as weak as and as confounded as the existing vax versus unvax studies might be, and because they're all retrospective EPIs, so yeah, they'll all be confounded, and some are based on parental surveys, so there's recall bias, and some are not well-powered, and some are this, but they're consistent, and they virtually all show the kids who are vaccinated have multiple times the rate of the chronic health conditions as the unvaccinated kids do. Now, again...
Well, can I say, and that's my take on it too, but that's not medicine's take.
Oh,
and until the greater...
Well, when you say medicine, who are you talking about?
Mainstream medicine.
Well, what does that mean?
Most doctors. Most public
doctors.
Health. Okay. Most doctors. I would say the vast majority of people wouldn't agree with that. They would say those studies either haven't been done or they're not great studies. Yeah. And they don't believe that vaccines have anything to do with long-term illness. That's, I would say, the mainstream opinion in public health. And so until there's even an acknowledgement that they could cause some of these issues, I don't see how anything's going to change.
So here you are from one city, Los Angeles. Sounds like at least 10 other pediatricians. They're all pediatricians, the 10 other doctors you're referring to?
Yeah, I'm referring to pediatricians. There are some adult doctors too.
Pediatricians who, see unvaccinated kids. The collective experience amongst the professionals in a major U.S. city, from what I'm hearing from you, who do pediatrics and see unvaccinated kids, that the unvaccinated kids appear to be healthier overall. If that doesn't drive scientific inquiry,
right? But
when are you going to get it?
That's literally my point. It's if I am seeing this, I don't care. Like, I have no reason to be sitting here talking about vaccines. It was the last place I would have ever thought I would have been when I'm in residency at Children's Hospital. I'm not trying to get people not to vaccinate. It's just, this is what I'm seeing. This is what other people are seeing. That's what's supposed to drive science.
Okay. So the argument you're going to get back, I'm sure, is folks are going to say, okay, so the reason you're seeing that the vaccinated, actually, this doesn't even work. I mean, I guess what they're going to say is the reason the unvaccinated kids are healthier is they're not getting pertussis. Even though that actually doesn't work, because pertussis vaccine doesn't stop the spread of pertussis. But they're not getting measles, because that vaccine can stop the spread of measles.
Sure, that's true. I mean, I think that to some degree, there's no question that some of these vaccines decrease your risk of getting the diseases, decrease your risk of severe disease. But that's just one small point. I don't think that needs to be debated all that much. The question is, at what cost? Right? Let's just look at the measles vaccine, for example. if you get both measles vaccines, it's very unlikely you're going to get measles. The risk is very low. The vaccine works pretty well overall. You see mostly the kids who are getting measles haven't had the vaccine. That's generally what you would see. But the question is not that. The question is at what cost? What are the side effects? What is the risk? And then what is the risk from the actual disease? And then can you put those out on the table and say, okay, well, do I want the vaccine? Do I want the risk from the vaccine, or do I want the risk from the disease? And then you have to do that for every single vaccine, for every single disease, and weigh the risk versus the benefits. Like we did that with smallpox, right? Not everyone just gets a smallpox vaccine just because. We said, well, there's not really a risk anymore, so we don't do it. We don't just give everyone a yellow fever vaccine just because. If you go to Africa where you might get yellow fever, you consider if you want to take that or not. Mm-hmm. You don't just get malaria pills when you're walking around LA. So I think we don't have those same informed discussions with every vaccine. But I would say that the thing that people would say about me, if they were going to say it's not what you said, I think they would just say, oh, he just wants to make money, just wants to be on podcasts, just wants to sell his book, and then they forget that, you pay when you go somewhere. Nobody pays you to be on podcasts. You pay to make a book if you're self-publishing, and nobody wants to publish a book when you're publishing a vaccine book. You can make a little money, sure, in the long run if it does fine enough.
It's such a great career move as a doctor to take issue with vaccines.
It's like, for me to write the book, I had to make the decision that I know what's coming, right? And you potentially are going to have a lot of backlash from it. It's not a decision you do because you want to be famous. It doesn't make any sense.
Now, I believe you went on now Secretary Kennedy's podcast a number of years ago. And when you were on there, you didn't talk about vaccines, did you?
We didn't. We just talked about kids' health. I mean, back then, I would say, let's say 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, maybe, I didn't talk about vaccines at all. Anywhere. I would go on...
But you would go on podcasts.
I'd go on podcasts.
And you would never talk about vaccines.
Not as much as I have done in the last year or two, but still did tons of podcasts back then, including Secretary Kennedy's. And before I went on, they would always say, okay, what do you want to talk about? What do you not want to talk about? I always say, I don't want to talk about vaccines. So that was the only topic I would not talk about. Anything else I would.
And at that point, you were already seeing the differential between the vaccinated and unvaccinated kids in your practice?
Yeah. So, I mean,
you were kind of aware of that, or you're starting to become aware?
I was certainly more aware of it. So when I started to do integrative medicine, when I started my own practice, I had no idea that people would have so many questions about vaccines. And so I had to learn more about vaccines because I was getting so many more questions. And over, that decade, I realized that there were so many unanswered questions. The more I read, the more questions that I had. But this was really at the time, especially in California, where things were tightening up. We had so much censorship. I'm watching everybody lose their platforms. Doctors that I know lose their licenses, giving exemptions. So it was just not something that I really wanted to do. Looking back, I wish maybe I did talk about it more, but I didn't do it because I knew that everything would have been taken away. I mean, I would have lost my license. I know many doctors that did. And so I just decided...
So maybe not a good career move.
Not a great career move, but maybe, the right thing. So I just didn't do it. And then at some point I decided, well, I feel like I need to. And certainly with COVID, it was so frustrating watching the public health messaging that made no sense, safe and effective. You need to get a vaccine even though you had COVID already. Like none of that stuff made any sense. And so I decided that I just had to speak out. I couldn't just talk about these things in the office and not online, where I was getting more and more questions. And I'm so glad that I did because, thankfully, things have changed a bit. But it's a lot more fun and a lot more interesting to actually have real conversations and be able to say what you think and just be honest.
I'm sure it does feel good.
Because it was hard to not talk about that when people wanted to.
Yeah. It's it's almost like you've unburdened yourself from the truth that you were holding inside. If every pediatrician who has a knowledge about these products, and my experience, and tell me if yours is different, the pediatricians I find who are very knowledgeable about vaccines, the underlying diseases, who really have taken the time to really study them well, often end up in practices like yours, where if you have a family that wants to vaccinate, okay. Families who don't want to vaccinate, no problem too. They understand that. They can see the rational thought process that goes behind choosing to not take one or more of these products. If every one of those folks spoke out like you are, and I don't mean like become, I'm not saying like go and, I'm just saying just speak their truth. Just speak their truth about it like you're doing here today and like you did in this book, which I think, you try to be balanced. about things, so to speak, I think that the conversation might change nationally.
It would. There are so many more doctors that have questions that reach out to me in private. I'm sure you get lots of people that reach out to you too, similarly that are thinking in this way and are very thankful these conversations are starting, but they're not so comfortable to talk about it themselves. I mean, especially with doctors, most are not very good at speaking. Right? Most are not, public speakers. They're not really interested in that. They didn't go into it. They're like nerdy people that just want to help kids, right? And they're not really interested in going on podcasts or going on shows or talking about things or even, ruffling any feathers, because a lot of them work in a big hospital or a big practice. And if they do start to speak out, their job's at risk. So they don't even want to be open to taking kids that are vaccinated. It's just, if the conversation starts to change, I think we would see much more momentum in that direction. But it's still very controversial for doctors, unfortunately, to speak up.
I mean, in California, when they passed SB 276 in particular, which is a bill that basically put it in the hands of the state health department of whether or not a medical exemption should be valid, and gave them essentially opened the floodgates for them to go after and persecute doctors who gave medical exemptions.
And they did.
And
I don't think that most doctors in California realize how crazy it is to get an exemption. I think most doctors would say, oh, no, if a kid had an issue, they could get an exemption. But most doctors won't see unvaccinated kids, so they don't know the stories. I mean, now that I will take kids that are unvaccinated or have a book, people reach out all the time. I hear all sorts of crazy stories now, and these individuals still can't get exemptions. And
all right, Tom, what's the craziest situation that you've encountered where it was so clear a kid needed a medical exemption, couldn't get one?
All right, let me give you two stories. So these are more recent. So let's start with an exemption story. This is an anti-vax mom. Okay, this is an anti-vax mom. So they say. 2-month-old kid went in to get their vaccines, got all the regular vaccines.
Wait, I'm sorry. I thought you said the mom was anti-vax. Oh, sorry.
Called an Antivaxxer.
Okay.
You'll see.
But went in to get vaccines.
Went in to get vaccines.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay?
Please.
Yeah. Got all their 2-month vaccines. Kid had a terrible reaction, screaming, was rushed to the hospital, had super fast heart rate, needed a bunch of medications to get the heart rate down, went back home. So they thought it was supraventricular tachycardia. So for whatever reason, they didn't know. They weren't sure what was the cause, but it was the same day as they got their vaccines. Parents went in to get their 4-month-old vaccines. Hesitant, had a conversation about what happened last time with the doctor. The doctor said, no, it's probably just coincidence. We should do the vaccines, convince them to do it. So they got their 4-month-old vaccines. Same exact thing happened. Had to go to the hospital, was in the hospital for half a week. Heart rate came down, kid was okay, went back home. So then they went back in for their 6-month-old visit to get their vaccines, or to the vaccine visit. And they didn't want to do their vaccines anymore. Of course they didn't want to do them. They were like, well, is it really coincidence? It happened twice. Doesn't seem like it is. The doctor said, well, I'm sorry, we don't take anti-vaxxers in our practice. So if you're not going to do the vaccines on schedule, we're going to have to dismiss you from the practice. And that parent left. And they still couldn't get an exemption as they were getting older for vaccines. That's when they ended up reaching out to me a little bit later because they wanted to switch practice. They didn't want to do any vaccines. And that's an anti-vaxxer. Like this, first of all, that family has older kids. Those kids are fully vaccinated. That family went in to get vaccines. They did it twice. They had an extremely severe reaction twice, to the point where they were in the hospital. And that doctor couldn't see that maybe this is a kid that shouldn't get their vaccines. Like, it just blows me away. And then still couldn't get an exemption for school later on after having those kind of reactions. There's no way that kid isn't high risk, that's the kind of kid that should warrant a medical exemption if that family so chooses. Could it be coincidence? Sure, I guess it's possible that 2 times in a row they had this horrible reaction. But, I mean, come on. Come on. Like, it's ridiculous. That mom's a hero, not an anti-vaxxer. The point of having exemption rules is to protect people like that, but nobody wants to do it. Nobody wants to give exemptions because they're so worried that some person in some, wherever is going to be like, oh, it's one of your 5. Okay, let's take away their license. And that's what happens. Nobody can get exemptions anywhere because nobody wants to write exemptions. You can't. I can't write exemptions. You just cannot do it. They will take away your license. You have to send them to a specialist who you hope maybe will give an exemption. which is insane. Like the stories that you hear, but you just can't. Like the lawyers have told me, like, just don't do it. You're just going to lose your license.
Yeah.
So there's no way that you can send something to this other place. And no other state does that. Nowhere else in the world can you not trust a doctor to make a decision. Like, I don't think any other states do that I'm aware of, where you have to write an exemption and it goes to some other place. They look at it. They can take away your license for writing a valid exemption that the family's been explaining their risks. They had a serious reaction, and still they won't do it.
New York persecutes their doctors.
They do it too. There are other states that persecute the doctors, but I feel like California is the worst.
is the absolute worst.
Let me tell you another California story.
Please.
So, family called me for a consult. This kid was born. I've heard a couple things like this, but this one's pretty crazy. They had a very rare genetic disorder and needed a special medication for this genetic disorder. And so they flew to a hospital, which was in California, and they were there so they could get worked up to get this medication that could save their life and extend this child's life. They needed it, or this kid would die. The team, as part of their protocol, would not give the kid the medication until they would be willing to accept the hepatitis B vaccine. Kid doesn't have hepatitis B. Parents don't have hepatitis B. This kid has no risk of getting hepatitis B, but that's on their protocol.
How old?
Like a couple days old. And they would not give this kid the medication without him doing the Hep B. That was part of their protocol. And
a kid who's already got medical issues.
So the kid was going to die. Like, they have a very severe genetic disorder. They need a specialized medication to hopefully keep them alive. And the only way that they would do it as part of their protocol, because their theory is, well, the kid's going to be immunocompromised, and if they were to catch hepatitis B in the next few months...
How?
That doesn't matter, right? The point is that there's no...
shouldn't laugh. It's
not funny.
It's a sad
sick.
story. It's
but
sick.
So that family had to leave. They went to another state.
Oh, and they got the treatment.
To get the treatment somewhere else, because they would not give them the medication to save. And every minute mattered for getting this treatment. The longer this goes, the worse the outcomes are. The kid could die.
Yeah.
They had to fly to another state because they would not. They understood the risk. It's a completely reasonable thing to say, hey, maybe we don't want to give our very sensitive kid a vaccine that they don't necessarily... I understand. You could get hepatitis B, and you could get really sick from hepatitis B because this kid's going to be immunocompromised. I get that. That is a real thing. The family was informed. They don't want to do it. They will do their vaccines later. They don't want to ramp up the immune system. They don't want to have to deal with it. They have to get this crazy medication. Let the body deal with that so their kid doesn't die. Not a hepatitis B vaccine they don't even need. They would not give them the medication. And the family, they could have got a lawyer. We talked about that. And they could have got a lawyer. They could have sued. They could have whatever. It would have taken more days. It was like,
go to another state.
Just go to another state and do it. So they had to literally take their super sick kid to a different state to get a medication that they needed to save their life because they didn't give a vaccine.
What's crazy is if you look at the pre-vaccine from 1980 data for children born to non-Hep B positive mothers or otherwise even, you have to vaccinate 1 in a million kids to prevent 1 case of chronic hepatitis B before, in kids. So if you look at 0 to 14 years of age, 1 in a million literally is what they were persecuting this family over. I mean, where the kid had a 100% chance, it sounds like, of dying without this medication.
Right.
That's the
they
perversion
could have a
of medicine.
from the vaccine. This is a high-risk kid. They're already going to have to get a serious medication. They might not. It's just so beyond me that we've moved that far. And that's what frustrates me. It's not that there's no benefit to hepatitis B. No kid could ever get benefit. We haven't decreased the risk of hepatitis B. I get all of that. All that is true. But there has to be some sort of reason come back to medicine that vaccines are not on a pedestal. They're not a god. They're not a religion.
It's not a religion.
It's not a religion. But it's so powerful. But it is. But it's not a religion, right? And it has to come back to some sense of, hey, there's an actual kid here. There's no logic to force this kid to get hepatitis B. We want to talk about some other kids, a healthy kid. Okay, fine. You can have that debate. But this kid, the parents are informed. Why make them get it?
Because it's in many ways, it's like you have to take the sacrament to show that you believe the right things. It really, in some ways, is like if you don't do this, it's not even about the medicine. It's not even, to me, it's not about the medicine. It's about showing that these family is going to be compliant and they believe the things that we believe and they're not going to question us and, go down that whole road. It's like an ideology.
And it's insane because that ideology is literally doing the opposite of what doctors think it's doing. It's literally driving hesitancy because people start to see stories like that. They start to hear their friends go through that. And they're actually doing the opposite. Like, we're seeing hesitancy rates the highest ever because what's going on doesn't make any sense to most parents. Giving hepatitis B to newborns and forcing it on every kid doesn't make sense to almost every parent. Like, you ask the average parent, that doesn't make sense to them. Doctors go, oh, well, we've decreased the risk of hepatitis B over time. Yes, we have. And it's possible you could get sick. Yes, it's possible, right? It's certainly possible that somebody could come bleed on your kid, but I don't know of any cases of that actually ever happening. And your risk is like 1 in a million. So there are a lot of things that are risk of 1 in a million. You have to give people those options. Say, look, here's your risk. You could get hit by lightning. You could get in a car accident. Do you still drive a car? You could get hepatitis B. Do you want that risk? Some people are going to say, no, I want zero risk of hepatitis B. Okay, cool. Take your hepatitis B vaccine. But for everybody else, which are most people, they would say, my kid's pretty healthy. We're in a situation that's low risk. I don't think my 1-day-old needs a vaccine.
I think that the mortality from Hep B in 1980, the first hepatitis B vaccine ever was 1981. That was based on using human blood basically, and there was about 290 deaths in America. We're about 2,000 deaths a year in America, so it's kind of going the wrong way. I'm not saying the Hep B vaccine caused it. I'm just saying it's not going in the right direction. And 1 in a million. You need 1 million, you got to vaccinate 1 million kids to prevent 1 case of chronic Hep B in a child. Based on my own data, parents seriously, because think about it, birth cohort, 3.8 million kids, 4 million kids born a year. So you need 4 serious adverse events from the vaccine a year. 5, you're upside down and you're probably on your risk benefit and your cost benefit to risk ratio.
Right, and that's what makes Hep B such a crazy...
We see more than that.
I know.
I see more seriousness than that.
And that's only what
right,
can relate to it.
Right. I mean, I actually don't think the benefits outweigh the risks, period, based on the actual the data that's available, at least available based on the historical data and the data available for serious injury from this product that we have.
I think for most healthy babies who have healthcare, who eat healthy, breastfeed, all these things, the risk is so low from the disease, and there has to be more risk to vaccines than we know of. When you talk about 1 in a million severe risk, that doesn't make any sense. That's you're talking about. We have seizures, we have encephalitis, encephalopathy. Why are those the only things that it could do to your brain? We know that it could cause autoimmune conditions. We know it can cause Guillain-Barré. Why couldn't it cause some of the other things? It just hasn't officially been associated with it. But even if it's 1 in 5 million for heart issues and encephalopathy and 1 autoimmune condition.
Encephalopathy mean brain damage.
Brain damage. Like, if you take every single serious thing that could possibly happen and you say 1 in a million, 1 in a million, you add all those up, there is a real risk from a vaccine. Like, you have to add each thing up, and then you have to add it up across multiple vaccines over time. And so if you're preventing disease, you have to add that against all the risk. And there's no way to know in the way that we do things now what is an actual vaccine injury, especially a few years later. How would you know if you got cancer when you're 10 has anything to do with getting vaccines in the way that we track anything? There's no way to know that. And you say, oh, there's no... Well, maybe eczema is even 3% related to vaccines. That's still a huge amount of injury or disease that vaccines are associated with. That is important to know, so you can put that in the context of making a decision, especially when you're talking about how many vaccines we have now, because maybe you then can prioritize just a few of them.
Maybe we could look at pediatric practices and see what happens over 10 years between the kids that get no vaccines and kids who get vaccines. But one of my favorite data points that overlays with that I think reflects what you're saying is, and I say this all the time, is, 1986, a child following the CDC schedule got 3 injections on or before their first birthday. Child today gets 29 injections following CDC schedule on or before their first birthday, including 3 shots that the mother gets while the baby's in utero. And we've gone from, as the data reflects, under 10% of kids having a chronic health condition in the early 1980s to over 40% of kids having chronic health conditions today, according to the CDC data. Okay, and those data and the chronic health conditions that have exploded are often related to some form of immune system dysregulation or dysfunction. So for the related to neurological issues related to your immune system, like you just said, your immune system attacking your extremities, fancy term, GBS, or your immune system attacking your spinal column, fancy term, transmyelitis, or your immune system causing brain inflammation. You said the word encephalitis. Or your immune system causing brain swelling to the point where it causes damage, encephalopathy. You just said those. All the things you just said, right? And nobody can test vaccines can do those things, right? So we've seen this explosion. We've also seen the explosion of the vaccine schedule, the very thing that modifies the immune system. And as you know, modern medicine can't tell you what's caused the explosion, but yet they don't want to look at the thing that apparently the pediatricians across LA who have lots of unvaccinated kids are seeing a differential, and it sounds like you're telling me.
Yeah, I mean, it should be on the table, right? Should be off the table is one of the things that we're associating potentially in the future.
Instead, we're letting kids die if they don't get a Hep B vaccine. Is what for example, with this kid with this rare genetic disorder, just shows you the degree, in my mind, of the fervent religious convictions that folks in the medical community have about these products, where the data or studies you're envisioning should or could happen, they're not going to happen. You've got to make decisions based, I think, on the best available data at your fingertips today. And I think we're getting a sense of what that looks like. Yeah.
Agreed. I mean, just think about the weird contradictions in medicine. Like, you as a doctor give a patient amoxicillin, let's say for an ear infection. That kid, a few days later, has a bad rash. Maybe it was just a virus, so they got that rash. But you're like, maybe it's a reaction to amoxicillin. Let's never give them amoxicillin again in their lives. A kid has a vaccine and the next day has a seizure. You're like, it's just coincidence. That's just the way that it is. Like, nothing else has that kind of... You would never give a kid a medication that they might have had a reaction to. And with vaccines, you don't just give it, you give them multiple, again, over. You never associate the problem with the vaccines. Never. Almost never.
And going back to your example, which I thought was just, 2-month-old goes in and gets admitted to the hospital for heart-related issues?
Mm-hmm. Twice.
Right. Happens first time, like right after the shots?
Right after.
Literally immediately.
Like, I don't know, within the hour, yeah.
Within the hour is having a super fast heartbeat. Mm-hmm. Baby's heart, little heart, 2-month-old going boop, 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 right? To the degree that it required immediate hospital intervention.
Correct.
And that happens again.
Right.
The second time you're saying at 4 months old, again within an hour?
Again within an hour.
Within an hour, this time half a week in the hospital?
So, yes.
I mean, that sounds serious.
It's very serious. Why would that person get vaccines? Again, at least at least at a minimum in the next little while. And at least if you were going to do it, let's say one at a time, wait a little bit, let that kid get older. Let's see. How is that anti-vax? It's so crazy. That kid would never get any other medicine again. That happened. If he was an antibiotic, something for reflux, whatever. Like, you would never give that kid a medication if that happened right after twice or once. It's not anti-vax. It's just that is common sense logic. Being a reasonable practitioner. Being reasonable to, we don't know for sure because there's no test that says, hey, you could test the heart, like, there's an antibody from the vaccine that you could see. You can't do that. You have to use your common sense.
Well, maybe anti-vaxxer just means thinking, caring, reasonable decision-making regarding vaccines.
It seems that way more and more these days, which is nuts. And that's what I think most doctors don't get, is most people that have concerns around vaccines are actually very educated on the topic. You were talking about this before, but it is really telling to me that literally any person who reads more about vaccines has more questions. It seems like the most educated on the topic have the most questions, are the least likely to do vaccines. If there was so much amazing evidence that showed that the opposite, wouldn't you expect that the more educated you got, everybody would be more fervent pro-vaxxers? The people that are super pro-vax usually are either doctors that went through the system or somebody whose kid unfortunately got one of the diseases and got sick. But the people that actually generally have healthy kids that read about this tend to have more questions around vaccines. And you've said it many times, I've said it many times. You look at who is the most likely to be unvaccinated, it's the most highly educated groups. I mean, that's CDC data, that's just the research. It's the most affluent populations, the most educated. Those are the people most likely to choose not to vaccinate. that is very odd to me that those individuals who you would think would be able to read the data as best as possible would come to that conclusion.
I'm going to read you one of my favorite quotes. And Michael, can I get a copy of my book off the bookshelf quickly? You just hand it to me. Appreciate it. It's one of my favorite quotes ever because exactly what you said. The CDC says those who don't vaccinate are actually, who choose not to vaccinate, are very highly educated. And this is one of my favorite quotes. I put it right at the beginning of my book. You should put it in your second edition. Okay. Crib it. It's good. It's really good. This is from Emily Brunson. She's an MPH, which is Master of Public Health, and a PhD. And she's a vaccine proponent. You know, she promoted vaccination, blah, blah. And she says, quote, I think we need to avoid the trap of thinking that information or knowledge is enough. Because for a lot of the people, and when you look at hesitancy and parental vaccine hesitancy in the U.S., the group who is most likely to purposefully choose to not vaccinate are highly educated. And here's the best part. You ready for this? In speaking with them, these are people who have read the primary literature themselves, and they're correctly interpreting it. So it's not a misunderstanding, end quote. Meaning she's saying they're looking at the clinical trial data. They're looking at the underlying, the pre-licensure safety data, the post-licensure safety data. They're correctly interpreting it, and they're reaching the conclusion, and they're highly educated, no vaccines for our kids, right? So she's saying it's not an information, not a data problem. It's not a truth problem. It's a problem with the truth.
Right. And I mean, we could just talk about you and I. Like, just go through either one of our books and tell me where we are wrong. I am happy. Look, I have a master's in epidemiology. I've done great medical training. I have no reason to make anything up. I don't care if kids get 1,000 vaccines or 0 vaccines, just want them to be healthy. I'm just relaying what I've learned. And I did not come from here. This is just what I've read and learned and seen over time. And when I read through the literature, that's what I see. I have a lot of questions, and I'm very happy to speak to any doctor anytime, have them debate it, have them discuss it, have them change my mind. I'm happy to change my mind. If anything that I've ever written or said is wrong, I'm happy to change that. I'm not trying to convince anybody not to get vaccines. We're just discussing what the literature says. And if the literature is different, show us it. Anytime you say that to somebody, no, there's tons of studies. But there aren't. You talk about autism and vaccines, there aren't tons of studies. There aren't tons of patients. It just does not exist. Like, if doctors actually looked at the vaccines autism research, no doctor would ever say the science is settled. That doesn't make any sense based on what the literature is. The literature is not even close to settled. We don't even have a literature on vaccines and autism. Not really, right? We have on MMR, we have on thimerosal. There's the one study on antigens, which is really DTP versus DTaP. We don't have vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies. We have 0. We don't have studies on any of the other vaccines. So how could you say the science is settled? You can just say, based on what we have so far, based on the mainstream 20 studies that Paul Offit or whoever would quote, those studies don't show that vaccines clearly relate to autism, or MMR doesn't cause autism. Okay, that's fine. You could say that. But you can't say vaccines don't cause autism. You can only say we don't know. We should study it. And when you have thousands, hundreds of thousands of parents saying the exact same thing, my kid was developing normally, they got a vaccine, and then everything changed. That parent has no reason to lie. They're not an antivaxxer. They're not against vaccines. That's their experience. If it happened once, okay, that could be anecdotal. When it happens thousands and thousands of times, that's this kind of information we should be listening to, and not, oh, well, vaccines don't cause autism. Okay, well, go look at the research, and anybody send us a study that they don't exist. You know that, I know that there aren't vaccinated versus unvaccinated autism studies. It's never been done.
Well, it hasn't been done with the outcome they want.
Okay, fine, fair, but there is not
so
a
they
published
malign
study.
them, but,
correct?
But they don't like if those studies that do exist showed the vaccinated kids were healthier, they'd be touting them all day long.
Of course they would. So, but at least what you're saying is correct. But if we keep it to what we know in the published literature, it doesn't exist. So you could very clearly say we don't know. There's no mainstream research to show that vaccines definitely cause autism. I mean, I've taken care of kids that had autism that never had a vaccine. Autism is very multifactorial. There are many reasons. The question is not, do vaccines cause all autism? It's, is it related in some way for some percentage? And when vaccines can cause seizures and encephalitis and encephalopathy, it's not unreasonable to think that it could also cause other brain damage that we could then call autism later on. That's not an unreasonable jump to make. Just like you were to say, oh, vaccines can't cause heart damage. Well, they can cause myocarditis, but not any other kind of heart damage. Oh, rotavirus could cause intussusception, could affect your gut, but it couldn't affect your gut in any other way. Like, that doesn't make sense. It could, so we should know.
Of course it can. And, when you go, for example, to the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, you can see compensation for all of the injuries that are comorbid with autism. Just don't say the A word, right? Because autism typically does not just in isolation. It's usually with all types of seizure disorders or, multiple times the rate amongst autistic populations. Because when you damage the brain, to your point, it's not like it just causes damage in those three things that make up the DSM-5 diagnosis for autism. They can cause other issues. And so you can get compensated for all of those harms from encephalopathy. You just can't say the A word. But anyway, so I completely agree. Actually, what you're saying is actually reflective of the quote we just read, which is, for those who actually look at the literature like you did, for example, on autism, the most controversial issue, the one they say they studied the most, you looked at it carefully, and what you found was there are no studies that support the vaccines given in the first 6 months of life don't cause autism. And then the very few studies they are relate to basically MMR and thimerosal, and those are actually highly confounded, but we'll leave that aside. And so you're like, wow, you can't say vaccines don't cause autism. But anybody who's not looked at that and is listening to you, they're like, really? Can that really be true?
Right. Well, that's what I thought. Right? When I was doing the research for the book, that's what I thought. Like, when I started looking through to do what I thought I was going to find in vaccines and autism, because I'm obviously in the integrative world. So I was like, okay, there are some more fringe studies that, maybe associate vaccines with autism, but I'm sure I'm going to be able to show, here's why doctors are so strongly saying that vaccines don't cause autism. And here's the other research. It's not so settled, but here's the definitive research. Here are all these studies. And then you go look, and you're like, okay, wait, where are the studies? And I didn't believe it. So then I had to go read Peter Hotez's book and Paul Offit's book and several other books that were very mainstream, and okay, look at those sections, look at their references. And they have the same references that I found. I was like, that can't be it. But also, somebody like Paul Offit would put a study in there if it existed that was so good. So I have to be like, that's got to be what the best is. And then you go listen to the depositions that you had with Dr. Edwards, and that was the main one, I think. Hotez too, but Paul Plotkin.
I would love to depose Hotez.
Yeah.
Hotez, let's go, man. Anytime. This chair is waiting for you. Yeah, and I'm happy to depose you if you want separately.
I bet Plotkin, but Hotez would be fun too. But I think the Dr. Edwards deposition was the most interesting, because to watch that conversation and to see the workaround of, no, that vaccines don't cause that. Do you have any studies for that? No. But we don't have any studies, so therefore it doesn't. You're like, but how can you say that? You can say anything. But that is the way that medicine is working right now. That's why we're taught vaccines don't cause autism. It's not because it's been researched. It's just because that's the belief.
And that's exactly right.
And then you just take that as gospel. And I think people that are informed, like, oh, doctors are evil, they're bad, they want to get. Doctors don't know. I did not know. Doctors do not know what the research is. I guarantee you, they do not. They think because they were told, because the CDC says it, because it's so definitively said, because they hear these people that they respect say it over and over and over again. They believe that the research is so strong. A doctor who clearly is open-minded of some sorts, more than most doctors, and was in that space, still had no idea until I did research for my book what the literature actually says. So doctors do not know. If they did know, they would not say the same thing. And if they did, I would love to speak to anybody that goes through that research and thinks differently, because I would love to hear that perspective. I'm open to anything. I'm very much open to it, but that's what the literature is. That's what it says. That's what the CDC website says. That's what, you talk to Paul Offit, or you listen to them, that's what they quote. That's how they speak about it. That's how they do it when they're deposed. So I can't imagine there is other research, because it would be in front page of the New York Times.
You flattered me by quoting the lawsuit in your book that we did. I mean, as you know, we sued the CDC. If they had the studies to show the vaccines in the first 6 months of life don't cause autism, surely they would have given it to us. They didn't because they don't have them.
Right, they don't exist.
And they don't exist. And we've done follow-up, deposed Edwards. I mean,
but that makes you an anti-vaxxer for saying it?
I've been on a crusade on behalf of ICANN to get those studies, and we can't find them. They don't exist.
And that makes us anti-vaxxers for saying that? Like, it's insane. It's so crazy. It's like...
Look, I don't take... Let me put it this way. I take no issue with the term anti-vaxxer. I'm going to tell you why for the following. And I think that actually talking to you the last 40 minutes has maybe solidified this for me because, maybe the term anti-vaxxer needs to be reclaimed. I mean this, right? Because it's used as a pejorative. It's used to say, oh, anti-vaxxer, that's it, don't listen to them. Everything else that comes out of their mouth should just be completely discounted. But, do you remember when, the Republicans came out with the term Obamacare, and it was meant as a slander. The Democrats did a great job of owning it. They're like, Obamacare, and they've owned it, right? And used it as a positive. Maybe folks out there should reclaim the word anti-vaxxer. I mean that. A word reclaimed. Reclaim it. And, and own it. And say, yeah. And what's wrong with that? The diction, I've gone through this. I had Jessica Suda was on, and we had a fun time going through the definition of anti-vaxxer in Merriam-Webster's. And I believe it's something like somebody who opposes getting one or more vaccines or mandates. And we laugh because that means the majority of the country are anti-vaxxers. Right? I mean, there you go. The pejoratives are because they can't address the substance of what you're saying. And they tell the public, I should say, listen to your doctor. Listen to your pediatrician. Well, you mean like folks like you, right? They mean listen to the doctors.
But not me, though.
But not you, because they don't really mean that then, do they?
No,
they don't mean it. They mean listen to the doctors that just parrot what the trade organization, AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, tells them to say, is really what they mean, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's true. And the big question is, how do we move it forward? How do we get the doctors to actually read the literature, to actually break through to people? I mean, it's probably just going to be a slow process. I think things are changing a little bit. I think people are a little more open-minded. I mean, that's been my experience, and I've tried my best to not shy away from having debates and conversations with regular doctors, mainstream doctors that have that mainstream opinion, because I think the more conversations that we actually have and that are getting on some of these platforms, the more that they're going to be willing to have a look at the research or be a little bit more open-minded. So it is changing. I mean, there's no question. You look at the doctor boards, the doctor chat boards, and Facebook groups and whatever, and it's really interesting to see how many parents are pushing doctors in the other direction because they have no choice.
Well, that's what I think is going to change it. You see these recent articles, how all the, a lot of crying and complaining about how, parents have questions now, and we have to actually talk to them and address them. And obviously they frame that as parents, they're just asking, did aliens create? And they're not. I think these are caring parents. If they think they're going to get anywhere by maligning parents, that's not going to work. These parents want to do it. Most parents want to do what's best for their kids. And when they actually take a look at a package insert, for example, that's going to raise some questions about that product. And I think it's reasonable to come in and ask those questions. Well, why? You mean if the product's safe, why does it need immunity? Something simple like that. I think it's a fair question to ask a pediatrician. And I think my hope is that that's going to force pediatricians to start looking under the hood.
Well, it is, because you see so many doctors now saying, well, look, our policy is we don't take anyone that doesn't follow the schedule, but we're losing so many patients. Do we change our policy? That is happening now. So many doctors, most doctors are so frustrated with how many people are asking questions. They're choosing not to do things. And that's just an insane thought. Like, you'd be upset that people are asking you questions. Doesn't mean they're not going to do it. They just want to talk about it a bit more. That should be the way it always was. But it was just, everyone just took it for granted before COVID. And then that kind of opened up people's eyes to the whole conversation around vaccines. And now things are a little bit more open with podcasts and social media. So it's forcing doctors to have those conversations and have to face patients that don't want to do everything and don't just accept everything that they say. And the numbers are getting so big that it's forcing doctors to have to really look into it because there's so many people that don't want to do it. Like, for example, in my practice, I don't need to advertise. Can't take 99% of people that apply because so many people just want to go to. It's not that I'm like the best doctor in the world. They just want to go somewhere that doesn't force them to do it. That is quickly escalating. There's nowhere. I mean, I know Bob Sears is the same. Like, there's so many people that apply to those practices. I could have 50 more doctors and fill practices, just on the not even unvaccinated, just people that go on a slow schedule. People are wanting that now. They're more open to it, and doctors are being forced to have those discussions.
Well, you know what? Then maybe you hit it on the head. Maybe the reason it breaks is nothing to do with health. It has nothing to do with children's health. It has nothing to do with chronic disease or vaccine injury or keeping kids safe. It might come down to economics. If enough pediatricians lose enough patients from their practices and because they're kicking them out for refusing vaccines, they might eventually go, okay, we got to rethink this. The dollars might drive their conduct.
It could, but that would involve enough doctors taking those patients. Or there's nowhere for people to go.
Well, it sounds like there's 10 in LA. That's pretty good.
Not for the, hundreds of thousands or millions of kids.
Who you're saying, because there's so many who don't want it. You turn down 99% of families who want to join your practice?
I can't really take patients, maybe some newborns, but.
And the most of them at this point are coming to you, I assume, because now you have a public profile around vaccines because they want to go
talk
slow.
To each other. They're all the groups that people go, I'm more hesitant. Like, who do you go to? Where do you go? So that's how I know the other doctors too.
Wow. Well, I mean, okay, that's a market for all the pediatricians in LA listening to this.
Everywhere, not LA, everywhere.
Everywhere. I mean,
there are so few doctors that are open to it, and that's. I mean, just from a purely business standpoint.
And you take insurance?
We take insurance. We're a hybrid, but a lot of the practices don't.
Okay. So it's possible to have a practice that respects the right to informed consent, respects and prudential choice, and take insurance.
Of course. I mean, you don't have to give vaccines. There's no rule that says a doctor has to give a vaccine, nor should they have to. Like, school has school rules that force you to do it in certain states, but there's no law that says you have to give vaccines. The problem comes in when people want exemptions. Because for exemptions, you have to have very clear documentation or they just deny it and they go after you. But if you just don't give a kid vaccines and they homeschool or they choose not to, there's no ethical or legal dilemma there. You just have to document, you talked about it, you explain the risks, they understand the risks, and they're choosing not to vaccinate. So you don't have to. And most people do choose to vaccinate. The majority of people still vaccinate. So it's not like you're going to open up a practice and just everyone's going to be a crazy loony out there anti-vaxxer. Yeah. Most people do it. A lot of people just want to have conversations. They want to hear about the risks. They want to have discussions. They want to be with you for a while. They still want to do, some of them, maybe they still want their measles vaccine. And they just want to feel like they can trust you. And if they do have a reaction, then you're not going to force them to do more. Maybe they're going to stop because a lot of kids do fine with vaccines. I think there's more and more vaccines. And then the question is, okay, how does that affect you in terms of chronic disease?
That's one of my favorite things about vaccine proponents. They argue that if you get rid of the mandate, they act like, or they even say, everybody will stop vaccinating.
Right, which is insane.
So that is a big tell in my view, meaning you have such low confidence in these products and in your ability to persuade the merits, and despite billions of dollars spent promoting them, you still think parents are not going to take them? Well, first of all, if you do, that's not an issue. That's an issue with your product, meaning you've created so many negative experiences among parents, injury, harms, the underlying data, that the knowledge base, if you actually study them, that people don't want them. But to your point, the reality is that most places that don't have mandates, in Europe, for example, in Scandinavian countries, many other places,
or just in America,
have they have philosophical exemptions or check the box exemptions, which is most states. Like 45 states effectively have check the box exemptions.
They haven't, but you could still get. But let's just say even the states where you could get a personal belief exemption, religious exemption, you could be exempt if you want to.
Right.
They don't have mass outbreaks.
They're basically check the box exemption.
They're doing just fine.
And they have high vaccination rates. And oftentimes, some have lower, some have higher, but most people still choose to vaccinate even without that. And in order to get that few additional percentage points, they go on this warpath, because mandates they don't need the mandate for those who are going to get it anyway. They need the mandate for those very small percentage of folks who just don't want them and are not willing to homeschool and are then again end up fighting with them. And for that little game, they've created what they call the anti-vaccine movement, in my opinion. Most of the folks out there who are out there fighting on this issue, they're fighting about civil individual rights. They're not trying to take away people's vaccines. They're not even trying to tell people really not to vaccinate. They just want to make sure everybody has the right to make their choice and then live their life how they want.
Right.
They create Del Bigtree, I don't think, would be doing what he was doing if California didn't get rid of their exemption.
Right. That's the fight. Everybody should get any vaccine that they want to get. Nobody should be forced to get a vaccine. You should get it based on the merits. You should get it because you want to. You should get it because the benefits outweigh the risks, or you believe the benefits outweigh the risks in your specific situation. And that's it. Because otherwise, we're going to have 1,000 vaccines. We're going to be forced to do something, again, what we don't want to do. There's going to be the next pandemic, the next disease. They're going to have some other product. They're going to say, oh, it's great, go get it. And they're going to force you to do it. If we don't take a stand, at some point, there's going to be something that each person doesn't want to do, and they're going to be forced to do it. It's as simple as that. And I mean, that's the way you finished your book, and it was brilliant. It's you couldn't say it better. It's like, at some point, you will have a vaccine or a product that you don't want to take, and then you're going to wish at that point that you weren't forced to do anything. There's no need to force vaccine. There just is no need for it. I mean, maybe in the midst of some crazy outbreak or whatever, but then you wouldn't need to force it. People would just do it. If there was some like amazing vaccine and some horrible disease that was killing everybody, you would have people knifing each other to get the product, right? Like, you wouldn't need to force it. Yeah. So there's just I would think there's very few situations where you need force.
Except you're thinking about it as a good person.
No, I get it.
A doctor.
I understand why.
Who's like cares about, like, is really thinking about actual health and overall,
But that, to me, that's the fight. The fight is for freedom to make that choice. And I think if that was true, if everybody had personal belief in religious exemptions, the temperature would go down and we could get back to actually trying to make vaccines better, safer, pick and choose which ones make the most sense for people. And maybe there would be, maybe if we didn't have liability protection, maybe the vaccine companies would have been forced to make better vaccines. Maybe we'd have some sort of drink, some sort of liquid vaccine that you get your measles and your whooping cough or whatever, and it would actually work better and have none of the side effects. If we would know what the side effects are, we could actually decrease them. And
well, I have a good sense.
I know you know, but I'm saying in modern medicine, let's just say, if you were to study it and you were to say it causes these things, you could, then doctors wouldn't be like,
if they were forced to admit it in courts of law, really.
Then you would say, okay, well, how do we make a vaccine that doesn't cause that? Let's take out that ingredient that's having that issue. You could make better products. You could have better vaccines. We're never going to have that unless we have, and every doctor wants that. They just don't know that this is what's going on. I think every doctor wants kids protected without causing risk. Logically. They just don't even know that vaccines are related to anything. And they don't think in that way. I think if it was proven to them in a court of law or whatever, vaccines cause autism, vaccine cause eczema, whatever it is, they would say, okay, well, why?
I think that the evidence and the data is there if they want it, if they're willing to take a look. You're never going to get the perfect study. You're never going to get the perfect data. What you have to do is make decisions based on the best available evidence that's before you. They do that all the time. On the efficacy side, they don't have perfect data. They don't even have, like, for various vaccines, they just use, they use blood markers. They don't even use reduction of disease in the real world, and they consider that sufficient. So they use the correlates of protection, as they would call it, the best available data. Well, let's do that on the safety side too. Waiting for the perfect study that's never going to happen is waiting forever. Let's just do it based on the best available data. So let's just take all of the existing data of what vaccinated kids versus those who are exposed, those not exposed look like, and we're just going to have to make a decision. And if you don't like that scientifically, because you say, well, that's weak, but this weak data is better than your no data. And let's lop into this, by the way, as the case series, I'll call it, of your experience and all the other pediatric practices, right? I mean, a lot of medicine is based on standard of care. And how does that develop? It develops because doctors across the country all start engaging in a certain type of practice. They find that it works. They continue to engage in it. They set a standard, whether the boards do and so forth. And then it kind of filters through. Well, in some ways, really, who should set the standard in terms of how safe vaccines are? It should be the practices like yours, where you can see the outcomes between vaccinated and unvaccinated kids, in my view. So you've got that. You've got the existing studies. You've got the various databases where you do have a lot of concerns. And so you could. I mean, my point is that I don't know if pediatricians that have not looked under the hood like you get a pass that easily, in my book.
That's fair, but doctors would say they should not look at my practice. They should look at what's in the journals and what's in New England Journal of Medicine and what's in, pediatrics.
Okay, great. And if they do, they'll see an absence of actual proper.
Correct. And that is why I'm saying, really, I think to have a change, we would need to get some of those studies. I agree with you. The research, there's some research there, but the research that doctors would respect doesn't really exist in the way that you would want it, I think. And I think it's very easy to be obtained, especially if you're going to do retrospective studies. You could very easily take the big databases that exist around the world, and you could decide beforehand with multiple different teams, say, okay, here's what we're going to look at. Here are the things we're going to do. Here are the ways we're going to adjust the variables. Let's look at this. This is really important. We're talking about vaccines for all kids. Let's look at this. Do we want to do more vaccine? We've all these people. We have all this hesitancy happening. Let's see what we see. And if we find what we think we're going to find, hey, that's going to be the best kind of evidence possible that people should go get their vaccines, because vaccines don't cause autism, they don't cause these issues. Let's go get it. And if they do find something different, it's going to make you think. It's very possible to be done. And if it was done, you would find issues, just like any other study that's done it. And then it would force you to do prospective studies.
Who's going to do that study?
Well, they have to. Whoever.
It
has to be coming from the top. It has to be the CDC. It has to be the HHS. It has to be other countries. It has to be pushed by doctors.
You think the CDC would ever do that study?
Well, no, but they need to.
You think HHS would do that study?
They wouldn't before.
You think Secretary Kennedy can even make that study happen?
No, I don't think he can't. I think he can't. That's the problem.
That's the White House will let him do that?
Would they let him do it? Not now.
So, I mean, isn't that my point?
It is your point.
Who's going to do this study that you're...
Correct. We need that done.
Maybe there's an HMO that'll do the study, right?
Maybe, but
will they publish it?
No, because then you have the Henry Ford study, right? These are the things that are the problem.
And then if somebody did do the study, what journal would publish it?
All these things are the problem.
So the only people that will do the study are folks like Dr. Paul Thomas, who had a pediatric practice, as you know, in Oregon, right? Was Washington? Oh my gosh.
Oregon, yeah.
Oregon, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Where he compared the vax and unvaxxed kids in his own practice, using that data, published it, and lost his license because he did it. The journal, I believe, retracted it, went on a rampage after him for doing it. There was another one that I think was published by Brian Hooker. They looked at 3 pediatric practices, combined the data, compared vax, unvaxxed, again, vaccinated kids. Again, same story, vicious attacks going after them.
Henry Ford study.
Same thing. Wouldn't get that one was different. That one
didn't even get anywhere.
It's that's chapter 12 of my book.
But what you're saying is that I understand all those problems, but that is the solution. The question is, how do we actually have that happen? I don't know the answer to that question.
I think the ones that have happened, you saw what happened to those folks.
But also, it's a slow trickle, and things have changed. Times have changed. People are changing. And I'm not saying we're there yet where we can actually get to the point where it could be done, it would be able to be done now. But hopefully, the more this goes, the more it happens. Maybe some doctor somewhere at Stanford or God knows where has some questions and is willing to do it. I don't know. Maybe you can get someone that's super pro-vax that actually finds something they didn't expect to find and actually publishes it. It's something that has to build. And if that Henry Ford study had been published, it would have been very helpful because it would have been the first one. And then people could have replicated it. That study should be as telling as anything.
Let me ask you this, okay? Let's assume that study came out. You have your own personal 10-year experience at this point. You've seen it with your own eyes, right? In a case series, basically, of God knows how many families over a 10-year period. If that study came out and showed, for example, whatever it showed, how much would that change your view about the outcomes? Because you have your own lived experience.
But would it change? You're asking, would it change my
Would it
experience?
change
No,
your views?
But it would change doctors' views. It would start because it would be a first thing, and then they would be forced to say, "Okay,
Meaning you know your truth already.
I know it, but I'm saying but that doesn't matter. Most doctors don't know it. The way to get through doctors is through the research, and that's what is still missing because there's this loop, like you said, and pharma knows it. I think they're behind, making sure that everybody gets, these things never end up going over. Why did that study never come out? He didn't want to publish it. If we could get somebody to actually publish something that would go in a mainstream journal that would have something like that, that would be the first step because then we could get replication.
My argument to you is that I think change is going to happen from outside the medical community because I find it unlikely you're going to persuade the majority of medical professionals to go against their pecuniary interests. Now, to your point, I think that if like half the parents in this country immediately stop vaccinating or refuse to go to pediatricians that forced vaccines, like that would cause a change. That because it would be economics. It'd be like, they want to make money. But absent something like that, I'm hopeful. Hopefully that will happen. Hopefully that is how we'll get there.
I'm not that hopeful, but that's how we could get there.
Hopefully that's how we get there. We could get there, but I never. I mean, look. Use an example from exemption land. We've got a parent who one of his kids is in a wheelchair from a vaccine, transverse myelitis. Right, vaccines cause his kid to be paralyzed for life, and that child was kicked out of school. Kicked out of school because they wouldn't get more vaccines and they can't get a medical exemption.
Right. I mean, I hear that all the time. I mean, we have so many patients.
And what do you think that does to that parent?
Right. How many patients that I've talked to?
Those are the parents, I think, at the end of the day that are going to break this.
Yep.
They're the ones I think they're going to make this. They're going to break this thing because it's bad enough you injured their child. The insult to then kick their kid out of school is just so far. They're creating an army of parents who are they're never letting this go. This has become their life mission in many ways. And the folks who are vaccine proponents, they don't understand that. I actually had a recent email exchange with Dr. Stanley Plotkin. I actually made an overture similar to what you said. I said to him, look, you want to continue to promote vaccines without all of the giant pushback you're getting? I said, let me tell you a quick path to get there. I said, I actually offered him, let's do a sit down and reach certain deal points where there's an agreement where you will come out, you and your minion, and we'll agree to the right of informed consent. That there shouldn't be mandates, or at least there should be check the box exemptions in every state. And that's it. Everybody should be able to make their own choice. You will immediately send 90% of the anti-vaxxer activists, you will take that temperature. I think
it'll be 99.9%. I think that's the most people
I didn't want to
for.
say you're probably right. I think that if you got rid of mandates across America, I think you would probably, for the most part, end the quote-unquote anti-vaccine movement.
I think that, and that's what going back to before, I think the strict rules in places like California are creating that army of people with stories that are so ridiculous that people start to hear it and that starts to make them question it. You're seeing in the numbers where the majority of people on most of the studies now are saying they're not so sure that we need to have mandates for everything. They're not so sure that schools need to have it. And the numbers are drastically higher than they were 10 years ago. And the more of these crazy stories that occur that are so obvious to anyone with common sense, because the rules are so strict, the more they're pushing people away, the more they're creating people that have to fight. And that's going to create enough of a movement that's going to push back, and it's going to push much farther the other direction. And that's what's going on right now. I mean, that's why we have Secretary Kennedy in there in the first place, probably.
I'm pretty firm in my view, subject to seeing better information and better data, that the main reason Bobby is where he is because of the vaccine injured.
I think
the vaccine injured, and it's the vaccine hesitant, and it's the vaccine, and it's medical liberty. That is what drove him where he is, and unfortunately, the current White House does not really appreciate that, and they're alienating the multi-million, if not larger, base of individuals in this country. They don't realize how widespread vaccine injury is. People are not interested in my work, and in this body, and what we're talking about, because They're just interested in it. They usually have some personal connection, and that's millions, at least millions of people in this country.
I mean, the other thing that people don't realize is just how many people have questions or concerns about vaccines. People that are very famous, that are very pro-vaccine. I mean, I take care of all sorts of celebrities. People that are out there getting their, photos about them getting vaccines, that don't get vaccines, that don't give vaccines to their kids. They're hesitant, right? I mean, there are so many people that are hesitant but are just afraid to say anything because they don't want to be ostracized. They don't want their kid not to go to school. They don't want people to know. Whatever it is, it's a lot more people than people think. And I don't know. I think we're just in a place right now where we're kind of in between because people are not as afraid to say something, but they're still very afraid. But it's like it's opening up a little bit, and we're starting to see just how strong a pushback there, especially after COVID, because I think most people had concerns around the COVID vaccine at some point. Certainly do now. Most people are not doing it anymore. Very few people gave it to their kids. Everybody knows someone that got injured in some way. It's way more injuries than are listed or that are recognized. I mean, I know way more people that I didn't even know a doctor who serious liver, almost failure, still got a second one. Like doctors had kidney, like not necessarily vaccine injury, but like they know it. They know it's an injury. How many doctors know that there are things that are injuries but just don't list it? It's much higher than we think. The question is just how high. I have no idea because I don't know what a vaccine injury is.
When you say you don't know what vaccine, you mean you don't know what % of chronic health issues are related to vaccines. That's what you mean.
Or what conditions.
What conditions.
What conditions, how, and how much. I think based on what I've seen, it is related. Is it 5%? Is it 10%? Is it 20%? Is it 50%? Not all eczema, not all allergies, not all autism, for sure, is vaccines. The question is it 1%? Is it 5%?
Right.
Whatever that number is, we need to know what that is. Because if it's 75% of kids with eczema have something to do with vaccines, that's very different than if it's 1%. It's still important to know that it's 1%, but it changes the equations drastically on who should get what.
I think that there's a lot of conditions that we know vaccines can cause based on, if we're just going to go by the CDC's admissions, we've already got a good number. Just look at the vaccine information statements, right? Look at there's the ones that have been adjudicated based on effectively proving causation in the vaccine injury compensation program, right? You can go through and look at a lot of different injuries. But I think that what you just said is right, which is what is the rate that they cause those harm? Which percentage of it is it related to vaccination? And, I don't know what that is, but based on the available data, it's not looking good.
Right. I mean, some people can walk by a peanut, whiff, just smell it, and have an anaphylactic reaction. So doctors say, oh, it's just a little bit of aluminum. Oh, it's just a little bit of formaldehyde, whatever. Yeah, that's true. But also for maybe that genetics or that kid, that's enough, right? Why can't an injection that goes into the wrong place, or you just have a certain genetics where you're sensitive to whatever it is, cause a reaction in 1 out of a million? One kid gets asthma, one kid gets allergies, one kid gets anaphylactic, whatever it is. We know that it can cause other things. So why couldn't it for those kids too? It just doesn't make any sense that it's not possible. You say it's a small amount, but what does a small amount mean? Yes, you eat more, but you're not injecting it.
Look, the tens of thousands of folks who've contacted my one firm alone with regards to serious vaccine injuries, there are people who vaccinate. That's how they end up with vaccine injury. That's the issue. That alone is extraordinarily telling. You don't take the time to go call a law firm if you're, for fun.
Right. They at least very strongly believe that it caused they could be wrong, but they believe it very strongly, right? So there's no reason not to believe that that's true and that isn't a vaccine injury, and the majority of them aren't a real vaccine injury.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, they're usually highly temporally related, so they happen close.
But that's just, what about all the other ones that aren't temporally related?
Right, those are the ones we don't get. Nobody calls and says, well, I got a vaccine, my kid has developmental delay now. We rarely get a call like that. The calls we typically get are folks who get a vaccine and something happens in very close relation, because the doctor's not going to say to them it's a vaccine. It usually has to be pretty obvious to them,
right? Their
own personal experience. And those are really, doctors used to listen to that. That used to actually matter, especially with kids. My kid got this drug and, all of a sudden is screaming nonstop. my kid was in a car accident and now is, banged their head and now is complaining of this or that or is having this symptoms. Doctors will immediately go, oh, okay, write that in. No problem. Got a vaccine, same thing. You know how many times when we get the medical records, we find a nasty note in the file?
Yeah.
Instead of like actually addressing it as a real issue.
But you're making the point, right? That is just immediate right after.
That's just
right?
immediate reaction.
So in your sense, and obviously, I see more people come to me that are concerned about vaccines. More people come to you because that's what you do. So you obviously have a skewed version because we're getting the most. But either way, the numbers are higher than 1 in a million, right? I mean, I think we know that. Anybody knows it, right? So the numbers are more than 1 in a million. But we're talking about just immediate effects. What about all the long-term possible complications? So is it 1 in 100,000 of serious complications? Is it 1 in 10,000? Is it 1 in 1,000? Is it 1 in 2? Is it like what are the actual numbers, right? And I know you're laughing, but like if you just take those, just take the serious things that happen after a vaccine. Let's just say it's 100,000, whatever the number is. If you're doing 1 in 100,000 and you're getting 30 vaccines, what's that number? Multiply those together. You're already down to somewhere like 1 in 1,000 of a serious risk. If parents knew that their healthy kid could have a 1 in 1,000, 1 in 500 risk, just that you could prove, okay, well then what is your risk of getting Hep B? What is your risk of getting Haemophilus influenza? Okay, baby measles, you have a real risk. Whooping cough, you have a real risk. You could weigh those two. But then for the things that are super rare, like diphtheria, death from rotavirus, the numbers start to change. That's not even including chronic disease. So that's why it's so important, because that is the information that parents want that they don't have. And making an educated, informed decision would come with knowing those things. And when people ask me, well, what's the rate of, what injuries are they? I don't know. That's why I say I don't know. I don't know what's a vaccine injury because I don't know how it affects kids in the long run. Yeah. I just know that it's more than we think.
Yeah, and you're being you're being scientific and you're being about it, which I respect, right? You're saying, look, I want to make it based on really good data. Whereas
I won't be able to talk to doctors if I don't. Right?
Yeah, no, I get that.
And I think that's the only way in.
But when it comes to parents, I think when it comes to parents, I think the fair approach is they just need to make the decision based on the best available data.
Correct.
Because they got to make the decision right now. They can't wait for this gold standard, super gold standard stuff that certain doctors would want. They got to do it based on what's available today and what's in front of them today. I think I think that the CDC's own data of what the very highly educated do after looking at the primary sources themselves do is very telling. I'll leave it at that.
It is telling, but it's very confusing when you have American Academy saying one thing, HHS saying another, CDC saying another, your doctor saying one thing, a different doctor saying another thing, a doctor online saying another thing. And you hear very different stories about the same product from different people that you respect or don't respect. And I think that makes it extraordinarily difficult because it's really easy to listen to us and, okay, well, this is their opinion. That's their book. That's the way that they've synthesized it. But, the other doctor thinks something totally different and that they're crazy. And I think from the outside place for a parent, it's still very, very difficult to know what to trust and what to believe, even if you read our books. Well, I get it's super hard right now. I think it's really complicated for parents.
I will tell you what I think parents should trust. Trust the primary sources is what I often tell a parent who comes to me with that concern. I'll say I don't tell parents whether they're vaccinated or not. That's their choice. I believe in everybody's right to get it or not get them. But if you're, you should trust. As an example. The clinical trials relied upon to license childhood vaccines. You could just look at the summary statement about that from the CDC or the AAP or talking heads, that are proponents of vaccines or even against vaccines or whatever you want to call it. Or you could just look at the actual underlying clinical trial documents. Now, obviously, most parents don't have the time to do that. Luckily, there's a summary of it in Section 6.0 of every package insert, and they could just look at that for any particular vaccine. And they could see it for themselves. And I would say that's a good place. There it is. It's the document summarizing. So was it a placebo control? Was there a safety review? How long was the safety review? How many kids were in the trial? And they could see it for themselves. That's harder to so I don't disagree with you. I mean, that's why, I think your book has like a lot of citations, right?
Oh yeah, they're in the website, but yeah.
They're on it's the website.
100,
That's right.
It's too long. I didn't want to have like
There's like
100
right.
pages.
So you have, a billion citations. I do the same thing. I cite every sentence so you can look at the primary sources. And sadly, with these products, you need to do that because the market forces aren't going to correct to make them safer because the manufacturers aren't on the hook. So you really do need to look carefully at this. But let's go back to the celebrities in your practice. So I too am aware of a lot of folks who are of, as you would call celebrities, some even proponents of vaccines publicly, who are in various positions in the public eye, who themselves do not vaccinate their children, but yet would never, ever speak about it publicly. I know the answer, I think, to this, but why do you think they don't do it?
I mean, I think they're worried about their career. They don't want to get blacklisted or, be thought of as crazy or, I mean, certainly in Hollywood, but I mean, but it's not just Hollywood. I mean, they have people that are not just movie stars, but like, athletes and everything. Politicians, all they know that it's a very hot topic. It's a very controversial. I mean, just like if you're a researcher, just like you're a scientist, just like you're a doctor, anything, it puts your career at risk immediately.
My favorite folks are the ones who are MP, Master Public Health, who often you see go to the health agencies or and MDs and so forth, who are actually literally in federal health agencies, who, choose not to vaccinate their children, which I find to be incredible, it's mind twisting for me. But these folks, they make their choice for their families, but are part of an apparatus, and they're not public about it. And then I no doubt will never be, most likely. But, if every one of these folks did go public, I think that would break. Talking about big picture solutions, I think that would turn the tide on this issue.
I think even with just a few together. Just an appreciable minority, a few together, that it wasn't possible to get rid of them all or blacklist them. I think that would be enough, because I think if you look at the data, which you and I know, a lot more people that have a lot of money, that are famous, don't vaccinate their kids, or certainly go on a slow schedule. They mostly all go to concierge, private doctors that come to their house, that work their way around things, to do whatever they're going to do. That's what the research shows. I mean, look at the lowest vaccinated schools, kindergartens, are the most wealthy. So I think you can assume that a large majority of them are not, if that's what the statistics are. I don't know. I only know who comes to me, but the majority are hesitant. They're at least hesitant. They're at least somewhat, they don't want to do it. They do it for school. I mean, it's different in California too, because you have to for school. But even still, they're hesitant. They don't want to do it. Some of them still don't do it. It's much higher than people think, for sure.
And then go across the folks with PhDs, especially those in the hard sciences. Oh, they get it very quickly. Those folks that I deal with, they don't need to. It doesn't take them long. They look at a few. It takes them just scratching under the surface of the literature and the science and the studies that are out there, and it's over for them very quickly. I mean, that's why the CDC laments about those folks, because they lose those folks very fast. Which is why they really need them all just saying safe and effective, and not looking and not thinking and not it's also why the CDC is very reluctant. So are proponents of vaccines to really engage with the substance. If you read their books, you will often find they're not filled with this, the same type of, in my opinion, citation to the broader body of documentation regarding vaccines from the FDA and CDC included.
No, they don't. And that's one of the reasons what led me to write the book, because it was like, you look at any of those books, it's very you read some of the older books that are more anti-vax, they're kind of very one-sided. But the pro-vaccine books, the CDC, the Paul Offit types, there's just one portion of literature. I did the whole section on asthma and allergies and autoimmune. The mainstream books say, it's not related. You can go find very mainstream studies that show that there might be some relation, some association to asthma, allergies, eczema. not fringe studies, like good studies. Studies by some of the most pro-vaccine. There was the aluminum studies that I think was Stefano or whoever did that that was increasing amounts of aluminum, increasing risk of allergies or eczema, whatever it was, and like very pro-vaccine. So it's and they say in their books there's no research. That's not true. There definitely is research. There's other research that doesn't show that, but it's very handpicked.
Yeah, you're
data.
talking about it was a CDC funded study using the vaccine safety data link where they actually looked at
the increasing aluminum.
one microgram increasing aluminum for asthma, and they found a statistically significant increased risk of asthma amongst, they call it, kids that got more aluminum adjuvanted vaccines. I'll just call it more vaccines.
Right, whatever you want to call it, but that's a good study done by very pro-vaccine people that showed something they didn't want to find. Then they did another study that didn't show
pro-vaccine as it gets.
Right, that showed something different. Fine. But you can't say that there aren't studies. You could say we did this study and then we did a better study. It didn't show it anymore. Fine. But you just don't even hear that study. You just hear, oh, there's no research on it. And it's absurd if you look at it, because there is research to show that there could be concerns, and then you find a way to make that go away.
It's given that you are subject to a medical board, and that even by talking about this issue, you put your license, your livelihood in the crosshairs. It's brave. It's brave of you to step out. I'm not subject to that. I would actually gladly have the Medical Board of California come after me. It'd be a lot of fun. I'd like to depose all of them. But I'm not subject to them. You are.
You can represent me when they come after me.
I will gladly depose all of them. But as you know, and I know, the unfortunate reality with medical boards is that it's a kangaroo court, really. They're not, the Roman rules of process really don't apply in the same way. And you're not really getting judged by a quote unquote jury of your peers. You're going to get judged by a group of the orthodoxy. So, it's appreciate that as a practicing pediatrician, I'm glad that you, at some point, it sounds like, decided that you were willing to bear that risk and speak publicly, and I'm glad that you did.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, I think if everybody just talked about what they know, or what they thought, we'd be in a much different place. And you don't have to be pro-vax or anti-vax. You don't have to be. There's no such word. I mean, who's anti-vax? It's not even a thing. Just say what you know.
Say
what you believe.
I'm
you can take that word
anti-tables, okay?
Yeah.
I am very anti-tables this week. Anyway, yeah, I understand what you're saying. Though I'm going to really, I think that I'm actually excited about this notion of reclaiming this term anti-vaxxer. I'm gonna give that some more thought. Is there anything else you'd like to share with folks out there?
Just thank you for all that you're doing. I think it seems like there's not a lot of hope in California to move things in another direction. You're probably the best hope. Maybe you'll win something in the federal level at some point, or we'll move back. But I mean, things are changing. I think it's not all negative. I've seen the shift in the last couple of years. We would have had a tough time even having this conversation a few years ago without being censored on every platform. So that's a big difference. And I've been on most of the big podcasts at this point, as of you. I mean, even on the bigger podcasts, but I've been on pretty big podcasts too. And they haven't been censored.
Yep.
My Instagram's not censored. Social media's not censored. You could say what you want. So that's a big step in the right direction. So hopefully that continues.
It's massive because the change, like in California, and you're talking about the lack of an exemption there, right? The change has to happen either in the legislative house or in the court system. And how do you get changes there? They often happen by first changing what the public thinks about an issue. You get that change that often drives the outcomes in the legislative process as well as in the judicial process. Not because judges are very busy and they rely often on thousands of cases on what the cultural cognition is on an issue to get through their docket. So that is very important, which is why I always tell folks, and it's why I said earlier, if everybody who took issue, who understood about these products, was knowledgeable about them, I'm sure I'm going to guess that's part why you wrote your book. That's why I wrote my book. I wanted people to be educated on this topic so they too can effectively discuss it with others. And the more, and when that shifts, when that tide, and it will break, the They are every new vaccine, every injury they're adding, it's going to break. And when it's going to break because enough people will have spoken out and been public and willing to not be afraid about it. When they get that phone call, when they're doing national surveys, and like, your kid's vaccinated, they don't go, oh my God, they just hang up. They're willing to answer the question.
Yeah.
And actually make the survey results be accurate. So the White House then knows, oh, wow, people really care about this issue. People are scared. When every doctor speaks out without losing their freedom of medical license, that's going to make a huge difference, right? You're willing to do it. The other pediatricians, out of those 10 pediatricians just in LA, how many would you say are public about this issue? Like, really public?
None.
Okay. Well, there we go. So there we go. We've got none. So if the other 9, I've no knock on them. I get it. I mean, like, it really is brave to do it. If they talked out, if the pediatricians across the country understood this issue, talked out, every parent of a vaccine-injured kid, many of them are afraid to be called anti-vaxxers, speaks out. They're willing to quietly vote and support Bobby because they know.
And even in California, I mean, do you see that there are some changes? And even, very interestingly, what the debates, the Republican debates, which I got to ask a question, they were all talking about vaccines, and they were all pro-freedom on that side, which you would never hear that discussed before at all. It was crazy to hear them speaking like that. There was the recent... So I was working with a team. You probably know Amy Bowen with Perk. She's great. Trying to kind of overturn some of the stuff there, like working on it. And, it didn't get anywhere, at least at first, but it was still a pretty close vote. I mean, it was like 3-4 or whatever it was, the vote. So it wasn't like it was 0-6. There's momentum. And I was supposed to speak at that, but I was in Mexico, which was too bad. So the timing was bad. But I mean, there is momentum going that direction. So I think if people keep speaking out, then the tide could turn. Not that, people are never going to vaccinate again, but maybe we could start to remove some of the crazy rules in California. Some, maybe some of the exemptions come back, and I'll be very happy if that's where we ended.
To me, it's not about getting people to not vaccinate. It's about getting folks to understand these are products, and we have to respect the right to informed consent and choice.
Correct.
That's what
all
it is.
That I want.
That's all. That's what it comes down to, and that can mean somebody still fully vaccinates, they don't vaccinate, whatever they do. And that's what Dr. Plotkin, in my exchange with him, is not still getting. So far, he has rebuffed me.
I don't think doctors get that at all. But they've never had conversations like this. I think if we could have conversations like this with most doctors, you could change their mind a little bit. Not the like hardcore zealots, but like most doctors are not there. Most doctors are just doing surgery, or whatever. They're not really all that caring about vaccines. They just do it. I think that yes, pediatricians certainly care more, but that's not all doctors. Most doctors don't really deal with vaccines. And then even in the pediatrics world, even in the adult world, I think that most doctors, if they had reasonable conversations and knew what the literature was, would ultimately move a little bit back towards informed consent. I think most doctors actually believe in that. They believe in informed consent. They just don't understand the implications of how this is affecting families. They certainly don't know how it affects families in California. That if you were to tell them the story, like that one with that kid who had the heart issues, they'd be like, yeah, that kid should probably get an exemption. That kid couldn't get an exemption. Like they would just think that they would, right? I don't think they know that those things are happening all the time and those kids are showing up at my office. They don't know that is the implication of what those rules are. And they think, oh, well, if you just make everybody vaccinate, then that's fine. The ones that need exemptions will get them, but we don't want the crazy anti-vaxxers to have measles come back. That's what most people think, and so they want the rules, and they think that pretty much if you need an exemption, you can get one. They don't realize that actually you cannot get one, and doctors are too afraid to do it. And so the implications are kids that really should get exemptions aren't getting them, and it's not that just people just don't want to do vaccines. There are legitimate reasons not to get a vaccine. And those kids are not able to get an exemption, and they have to move.
Well, I think on the hopeful note of the tide is turning, I think the tide is turning, and everybody out there, just keeps speaking their truth about it, like you're doing, and pushing on the issue. I think we'll get there, and hopefully soon.
I think so.
Well, I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me on.
All right.